welcome back to another episode of Us Anxious Folk. My name is Lauren. Thank you for joining me today. Today's episode is going to be about the topic of fear, and this obviously isn't a new topic for us given the subject matter of the podcast. I think the term fear comes laced with so much emotion for those of us who have been on the anxiety disorder end of the spectrum. Because I think a lot of our time we feel has been wasted living in fear. And to be honest, the subject of time wasted is a whole other topic, and I've spoken about that before, but I'm not going to get into that too much. But I know that when you bring up the subject of fear, there's a pretty strong reaction that it elicits in most people, but especially for those of us who have spent a long time really having fear accompanying our every movement. You wake up afraid, you go to sleep afraid, you go to a social event or you get in the car to go to work, and it just always feels like it's there. Sometimes feels like it's, breathing on the back of your neck and you can't concentrate. Other times it just kind of feels like it's sort of simmering away in the background. But either way, I feel like for me at least, fear has been kind of a constant presence in a lot of ways. And I wanted to talk today about bringing a conversation with fear to the table, because something that I have sort of hypothesized for a while is that when it comes to panic disorder especially, but I guess anxiety disorders in general, we feel afraid. We start out feeling afraid, and for some of us it can start with a panic attack. That's, the beginning point of our journey with anxiety. Can be a pretty severe panic attack that knocked us on our ass and was terrifying. So there's a lot of fear there. Or sometimes it's just like it builds up over time, but it's this constant feeling of being afraid. Like that's more or less what it was for me. There was a panic attack, but then it was this constant just becoming the fear self, becoming this person who was always afraid of everything and just always had that feeling of like doom. So then what happens is, because we have had this terrifying experience, or because we have this sort of increasing presence of fear in our body, we push it down, right? We suppress it and we try and avoid it, or we try and ignore it, or we try and push through. And it's like trying to keep a lid on a pot of boiling water that's like boiling right at the top, like it's hard and you're going to get burnt. And it just feels really intense, and there's a lot of pressure, and you can really picture it building up in your body when you talk about the energy of fear and how that might increase in our physical being. And we're constantly pushing it down and trying to keep it at a manageable level, and it's there and it's getting stronger and it's getting more present and more articulated in our being, and we're trying so hard to just keep it at bay. And I think anyway that what happens is we push this fear down so much that it starts to come out in thoughts, and irrational thoughts, so like having a panic attack in the car, or losing control of our mind, or accident, like all these random thoughts, having needing to vomit in public. Like these thoughts come up, and we know that when we unravel those thoughts, we know that if we follow it through, say like, or what happens if I do vomit in public? Like, is it going to be as bad as I feel like it's going to be? No. We rationally know that, but we also know that fear isn't rational for the sake of keeping us safe. But so we push down this fear, and it starts coming up in the way of, but what if this happens? And what if that happens? And it's that energy of fear is like, spurting out of us in these really uncontrollable ways. And, someone might say to us like, but, if that happens, it's not going to be so bad. Whatever you're afraid of, that's actually not, it's not going to be as bad as you think it is. Like you're making a big deal out of it, or you're overthinking it, or, you're working yourself up. And I think a lot of what that is it's that energy of fear that we are trying so desperately to hold inside that it has to come out somewhere. And so, of course, it comes out in physical ailments, things like headaches and like digestive issues and, aches and pains and tiredness and exhaustion and all of that kind of stuff. Nausea is a big one for me. For the last couple of years, nausea's been a really fun side effect that I didn't need. But yeah, so it comes out physically, but it comes out mentally in these just irrational thoughts that have so much power to them that doesn't correlate with the actual thought itself. And I was talking about this the other day with one of the podcast guests actually, and saying, how it works with creativity. Like when we find a way to channel our creativity, we tend to hurtle our way towards healing, because it's like we have a creative way of using all this energy inside of us, and it helps. And so it got me thinking about that energy of fear, and is there a way that we can appropriately express that? And I think in some ways that's why exposure therapy works so well, especially in the beginning, because not only are you learning that your worst fears didn't come true. So it's like you kind of call your own bluff and you're like, oh, I can't believe that actually didn't go as badly as I thought it was going to go. It's a relief to find out that it wasn't that bad. And that always feels good. But then I think there's also that act of using that fearful energy, like you're scared, you're anticipating how intense it's going to be and how hard it's going to be and how much you're going to panic. And then that adrenaline is building and building and building, and then you do the thing and it is able to move. It's able to move through you. And so you integrate that fear and you release that energy, and it has a place to go that isn't necessarily these overwhelming, irrational, unwanted thoughts. But it's not always possible to keep pushing the envelope when it comes to exposure. I mean, I guess you can to a degree, but if you're somebody who has a life and a job and kids and like all those things, it's like not always easy to keep, putting yourself right in the middle of your fears and pushing your comfort zone. But I kind of was thinking maybe there's a way that we can talk to fear and let it speak, so that it's not always this like ignoring of what's here so that it has to come out. Maybe there's a way of opening space to let fear say the irrational things that it wants to say. And I don't think the things that we're scared of, obviously they're not the things that we think we're scared of. Like toilet anxiety for me has never actually been about losing control of my bladder or bowels. Like that's what I'm afraid of, but it's not the crux of it. And I know that, but like that fear has to have a place to go. And so that's where it goes, that feeling of like, oh my God, but what if I humiliate myself? And I know that the underlying fear with that is, what if I'm not okay? What if people see that I'm not okay and that I'm not accepted and that I'm not right and I'm just a bit of a joke, What if I'm like exposed and I can't control how they see me? And as a people pleaser, that's terrifying. And so I think that maybe just creating space for those fears to talk, if you're in a mental space where that's going to be safe for you, I think it's maybe a practice that might create some more space and might release some of those irrational, unwanted fears. So what I did was I sat down and I got out my journal and I wrote, what do I need to know? And this was the letter I was writing to fear. And the things that came up were really surprising. One of the recurring themes for me was a fear of making the wrong choice. And that comes up for me as like a freeze state, but also as that irrational thought of like, what if I can't get there? You know, like what if I'm invited somewhere and I'm like getting ready to go, and that thought of like, what if I can't make it, or what if I panic in front of them, or what if, you know, what if I disappoint them? That fear underneath it all is, of course, that fear of not being accepted and loved and worthy and all of that, but that fear of making the wrong choice, the wrong decision, of leading myself astray and leading myself towards a life that isn't enjoyable. And I'm terrified of that. And so that fear, like just giving it space, just recognizing it was like, oh, you know, like I finally let it have a voice, and it's kind of like looking at the monster under the bed, you know, you're like, oh, that's not so bad. And I don't think we even necessarily need to do anything with it. Like, I don't think we really need to like work to heal that fear. Maybe we do, maybe that's further down the track. But for now, I think just recognizing that there's this energy there, there's these thoughts there that we aren't wanting to pay attention to. And so they are coming up in other ways. They are coming up in the form of strange obsessions. So that's been a really interesting journey for me this week. I'm really interested to hear your experience with this and what your opinion is, and whether or not this rings true for you. And if you have done this practice, or if this practice is something that you move towards, what does your fear say? It would be interesting to find out that a lot of our fears are exactly the same at the end of the day. I'm sure a lot of it does just relate to being a human being in a world that that is difficult at the best of times. I hope you're all doing really well. I hope that gave you some food for thought, and I will see you for the next episode of Us Anxious Folk. Take care. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to the Us Anxious Folk podcast, the podcast for the chronically overwhelmed, perpetually panicked, anxious folk in all of us. If you would like to find more about me, you can find me on YouTube at Lauren Rose, or on Instagram at LaurenR_Rose.